Let me be direct with you from the outset. What the Israeli government ordered at 4:30 p.m. local time yesterday is not a precautionary measure. It is not a temporary security protocol. It is not a civil defense drill. What the Israeli government ordered is the largest internal displacement of Israeli civilians since the establishment of the state in 1948, and I need you to understand exactly what that number means and what it reveals about Israel's strategic situation. I am looking at the official evacuation order issued by the Israeli Home Front Command, document reference HFC-0423-26. What it mandates is not a recommendation to consider leaving. It is not voluntary guidance. What it mandates is the immediate evacuation of all civilians from 83 separate localities across the northern district, from the Lebanese border south to the Jezreel Valley. 180,000 people. That is not an estimate. That is the official population figure from Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics for the affected zones. This is the Israeli government telling nearly 2% of its entire population to abandon their homes with 72 hours' notice. In the next 18 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this evacuation represents the most significant acknowledgement of military vulnerability in Israeli history, why the timing reveals intelligence assessments that Israel's northern border is now indefensible against Hezbollah capabilities, and why what happens in the next 2 weeks will determine whether Israel maintains territorial integrity or faces the first successful foreign ground incursion since 1973. This is the Professor Marandi report. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover represents analysis being deliberately downplayed by Israeli government spokespeople. Let's start with the geography, because understanding what Israel is evacuating from is essential to grasping the strategic catastrophe this represents. The northern district of Israel comprises approximately 4,600 square kilometers. That is roughly 15% of Israel's total territory within the pre-1967 borders. The evacuated zone stretches from Metula on the Lebanese border in the west to Kiryat Shmona and the Golan foothills in the east, encompassing the entire defensive belt Israel established after the 2006 Lebanon War. According to maps published by Haaretz and confirmed by the Israeli military, the evacuation zone extends as far south as Safed and portions of Tiberias. These are not small border outposts. These are substantial cities with deep historical and religious significance. Safed is one of Judaism's 4 holy cities. Tiberias sits on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Israel is not evacuating peripheral settlements. It is evacuating core territory. The infrastructure being abandoned includes 37 kibbutzim, 22 moshavim, 14 development towns, and critical components of Israel's agricultural sector. The Galilee region produces approximately 18% of Israel's agricultural output. The economic disruption alone, setting aside the psychological and strategic implications, represents billions of shekels in lost production and abandoned assets. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now, let's talk about why Israel issued this order and what intelligence assessments drove a decision no Israeli government has ever had to make at this scale. Announcement number 1. Hezbollah now possesses operational capability to strike anywhere in northern Israel with precision-guided munitions faster than Israeli civil defense systems can provide effective warning. And this one matters more than anything else because it represents a fundamental shift in the balance of military power along Israel's northern border. On April 18th, Hezbollah conducted a coordinated strike package against 3 separate Israeli Defense Forces positions near the border. The strikes used a combination of guided anti-tank missiles and loitering munitions. According to reporting by the Jerusalem Post, all 3 positions were hit within 90 seconds of each other, suggesting sophisticated coordination and pre-planned targeting. Israeli radar systems detected the launches, but the time from launch to impact was insufficient for personnel to reach shelters. 4 Israeli soldiers were killed and 11 wounded. That attack was not exceptional. It was representative. According to data compiled by the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, Hezbollah has conducted 47 separate attacks against Israeli military and civilian targets in the northern region over the past 31 days. 31 of those attacks, that is 66%, successfully struck their intended targets before Israeli countermeasures could respond. The Israeli military describes Hezbollah's operational tempo as unprecedented and unsustainable for Israeli defensive doctrine. Here is what that means in practical terms. The Iron Dome system, which Israel relies upon to intercept short-range rockets and missiles, requires between 15 and 45 seconds to calculate a trajectory, launch an interceptor, and achieve a successful intercept. Hezbollah's guided munitions are now reaching targets in under 90 seconds from launch. If the launch point is within 10 kilometers of the target, Iron Dome cannot reliably intercept, and Hezbollah has hundreds of launchers positioned within 10 kilometers of Israeli population centers. Colonel Gal Hirsch, former commander of the Galilee Division, stated in an interview with Channel 12 News 2 days ago, and I am quoting him directly here, "We do not currently have a defensive solution that can protect civilian populations in the north against the volume and precision of fire Hezbollah can deliver." That is not a retired analyst speculating. That is a former divisional commander with direct knowledge of current IDF capabilities admitting that Israeli citizens in the north are indefensible. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the evacuation is not temporary. Despite government statements describing this as a precautionary measure for the duration of heightened tensions, Israeli military planning documents reviewed by multiple journalists indicate preparations for civilian absence lasting a minimum of 6 months. This is the part the Netanyahu government is not stating publicly because the political implications are catastrophic. According to Yedioth Aronoth reporting from this morning, the Israeli military has begun constructing temporary housing facilities in central Israel capable of housing up to 200,000 internally displaced persons for extended duration. The contracts for these facilities, issued through the Defense Ministry's Homefront Command, specify construction timelines of 8 weeks and operational capability through March of 2027. You do not build 8-month housing facilities for a 2-week evacuation. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the gap between official government statements and actual military planning becomes impossible to ignore. The Israeli Treasury has allocated 14 billion shekels, approximately $3.8 billion, for evacuation-related costs in the current fiscal year. That budget includes housing, food support, unemployment compensation, and business interruption payments for evacuees. According to budget documents obtained by Calculist, the Treasury's internal projections assume displaced persons will not return to the northern region before October at the earliest. That is 6 months from now. Furthermore, the Israeli military has quietly begun relocating military units that were previously stationed in northern bases. The Golani Brigade's headquarters, historically located near Kiryat Shmona, has been moved to a facility near Beit Lid in central Israel. The Northern Command's logistics center has been relocated from Safed to a site near Haifa. These are not temporary field deployments. These are permanent infrastructure relocations that would be unnecessary if the military believed civilians would return within weeks. What does all of this tell you? It tells you that Israel's military and political leadership have concluded that the northern region is not defensible against Hezbollah's current capabilities and that restoring security will require either a massive ground operation into southern Lebanon or a negotiated agreement that Israel does not currently believe it can achieve. In the absence of either outcome, Israeli civilians remain displaced indefinitely. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The evacuation has triggered the first meaningful international debate about Israel's long-term viability as a secure homeland for Jewish populations. This is a conversation that was taboo even 3 months ago. It is now occurring openly in European capitals and quietly in Washington. The fundamental premise of Zionism, as articulated by Theodor Herzl and realized in 1948, was that Jewish people required a sovereign state where they could live securely, free from persecution and displacement. The images now playing across global media show Israeli families, many of them refugees or descendants of refugees from previous conflicts, being displaced again, this time from the state that was supposed to end such displacement forever. The psychological and political implications of that imagery are profound. According to Financial Times reporting from yesterday, property inquiries from Israeli citizens seeking to purchase real estate in Europe have increased by 43% in the past 60 days compared to the same period last year. Emigration applications, particularly from secular, educated Israelis with professional skills, have risen sharply. The Israeli government does not publish real-time immigration data, but immigration attorneys in Berlin, London, and New York report unprecedented demand for visa consultations from Israeli nationals. Think carefully about what this represents. When a government tells 180,000 citizens to abandon their homes because it cannot defend them, and when that evacuation appears likely to last months rather than weeks, it fundamentally undermines the core promise of statehood itself. It raises the question, uncomfortable for many but unavoidable given current facts, if Israel cannot provide security for its citizens within its own borders, what is the purpose of sovereignty? Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the international media is covering the humanitarian logistics of the evacuation while deliberately ignoring the strategic implications for Israel's future. The official narrative from Jerusalem is that this evacuation is a responsible government protecting its citizens during a temporary security challenge. Prime Minister Netanyahu described it in a statement as ensuring civilian safety while the military deals decisively with terrorist threats from Lebanon. That framing is designed to project strength and control. But consider the actual sequence of events that led to this evacuation order. On April 14th, the Israeli cabinet held an emergency security session. According to leaks reported by Barak Ravid in Axios, the military presented the cabinet with casualty projections for northern civilians if hostilities escalated. The projections estimated between 300 and 800 civilian deaths in the first 72 hours of a full-scale Hezbollah assault, based on the density of precision-guided munitions Hezbollah has positioned near the border and the limited effectiveness of civil defense shelters against direct hits from such weapons. The cabinet was given 3 options. Option 1: launch a preemptive ground operation into southern Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah's forward missile positions before they could be used against Israeli cities. Option 2: maintain current defensive posture and accept projected casualty rates. Option 3: evacuate civilians from the threatened areas to eliminate casualties, but accept the political and strategic costs of internal displacement. The cabinet chose option 3, not because it was militarily optimal, but because it was politically survivable. Why did Israel not choose option 1, the preemptive ground offensive? Because Israeli military intelligence assessments, according to Amos Harel writing in Haaretz, conclude that a ground operation into southern Lebanon would require a minimum of 40,000 troops, would last at least 6 months, would result in hundreds of Israeli military casualties, and would likely fail to permanently eliminate Hezbollah's missile capabilities, since Hezbollah has deliberately distributed its arsenal across hundreds of sites, many embedded in civilian areas. In other words, Israel is trapped. It cannot defend its northern population against Hezbollah attacks without a ground operation. It cannot conduct a ground operation without sustaining casualties and international criticism it deems unacceptable. So it has chosen the third path: displacement of its own population as a substitute for military victory. That is not strength, that is strategic paralysis. And the message this sends to Hezbollah, to Iran, and to every actor watching this conflict is unmistakable. Sustained military pressure works. If you can credibly threaten Israeli civilian populations faster than Israel can mobilize international support or domestic political will for military response, Israel will concede territory rather than fight. That is an enormously dangerous precedent for a state whose security has always depended on deterrence through overwhelming retaliation. If you are a resident of southern Israel near Gaza right now, or if you live in one of the mixed Jewish-Arab cities in central Israel, what is happening in the north is not someone else's crisis. It is a preview of what could happen to you if Hamas or other actors adopt Hezbollah's model of sustained precision strikes against civilian areas. The evacuation of the north establishes the precedent that Israel will move civilians rather than defend territory when faced with credible threats it cannot easily neutralize. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to June 1967. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan threatened Israel with destruction. Israel faced the choice of accepting encirclement or launching preemptive war. Israel chose preemption. In 6 days, Israel destroyed the opposing air forces, captured the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and East Jerusalem. The lesson Israel learned from 1967 was that preemptive offensive action ensures survival. Defensive posture invites destruction. That doctrine held for 57 years. It held through 1973 when Egypt and Syria launched surprise attacks and Israel counterattacked to victory. It held through Lebanon in 1982 and 2006 when Israel responded to threats with ground invasions. But today, in April 2026, facing Hezbollah's precision-guided munitions and Iran's regional proxy network, Israel has chosen evacuation over preemption. That represents a fundamental strategic shift, and it is not a shift born of wisdom, it is a shift born of paralysis. So, where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1: negotiated ceasefire and international buffer zone. In this scenario, the United States or another international actor brokers a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah, potentially including deployment of international forces to southern Lebanon to create a buffer zone. Israel agrees to de-escalation in exchange for security guarantees. Evacuated civilians return within 90 days. This is the best-case scenario, but it requires Hezbollah to accept limitations on its capabilities that it has consistently refused, and it requires international actors to commit troops to a mission no one wants. The likelihood is low. Path 2: prolonged displacement and frozen conflict. Under this scenario, the evacuation becomes semi-permanent. Displaced Israelis remain in temporary housing for 12 to 18 months, while Israel and Hezbollah maintain a low-intensity conflict characterized by periodic exchanges of fire but no full-scale war. Israel accepts loss of territorial control in the north as the cost of avoiding a ground war it cannot win decisively. This is the most likely path. It allows both sides to avoid escalation while accepting an unsustainable status quo. Path 3: escalation to full-scale war. This is the scenario where either Israeli domestic pressure forces Netanyahu to launch the ground operation into Lebanon, or Hezbollah escalates to a full assault that makes war unavoidable. Casualties on both sides reach into the thousands. Infrastructure across Lebanon and northern Israel is destroyed. Iran becomes directly involved. This path becomes more likely if the evacuation extends beyond 6 months, and political pressure in Israel makes continued displacement politically untenable. I think we are closer to path 2 than Israeli officials are admitting. The speed with which the military is constructing long-term housing facilities, the budget allocations extending through next spring, and the absence of any credible diplomatic initiative to end the crisis all suggest Israel is preparing for prolonged displacement, not imminent resolution. But here is what I find most revealing. In all the statements from Israeli officials about this evacuation, not one has provided a clear definition of what conditions must exist for evacuees to return home. Not one has articulated a path to restored security in the north. That absence of vision is itself an admission that Israel does not know how to solve this problem. Here are the questions I want you to take away. How long can Israel sustain internal displacement of 180,000 citizens before the political costs become existential for the government? At what point does prolonged evacuation undermine the fundamental premise of Israel as a secure homeland? And most critically, if Hezbollah's model of precision strikes forcing civilian displacement proves successful in the north, will Hamas attempt the same strategy in the south? Tell me in the comments what you think happens to the displaced northern residents over the next 6 months. Tell me if you believe Israel will negotiate a ceasefire, or if this crisis escalates to full-scale war. We will keep tracking every development in northern Israel, in Lebanese politics, and across Hezbollah's strategic calculations. That is what the Professor Marandi report does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what the Israeli evacuation actually means for the future of the Israeli state. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.